The global warming policy was invented during the cold years of the 1960s and 70s, when the science community became concerned about what might be needed to prepare our world for the impending return of the Ice Age. An honest response to the Ice Age challenge would have created a powerful new scientific, technological, and economic renaissance in our time. However, this renaissance would have been of a kind that the ruling oligarchic system would not have survived. Civilization and feudalism are opposite in nature. Civilization is built on human development. Feudalization, on the other hand, depends on preventing human development. The great threat to empire that the potential for a new renaissance has posed back in the 1970s for meeting the recognized Ice Age challenge was countered in 1974 with the introduction of the global warming doctrine at the United Nations Conference on Population in that year, held in Bucharest. The global warming doctrine has been immensely promoted ever since. It still rules the world to the present day. It does so even while the evidence is to the contrary or is misinterpreted. Arctic warming is often cited as proof that global warming is happening. However, the opposite is true. When heavy cold air is pushed south from the northern regions by the centrifugal force of the rotation of the Earth, an anticyclone system develops that draws a return stream of cold air into the north. The colder the Earth gets, the stronger the system operates, which is warming the north. It's a deception to cite the result as a proof for global warming. The deceptive politics of this type have deep roots that take us back in time to the collapse of the Roman Empire. Its oligarchy had withdrawn itself to the mudflats that became today's Venice. From here, the historic Venetian Empire was created, though in the rotten Roman tradition, by which it eventually collapsed itself, just as Rome had done. In order to save the dying Empire of Venice, the celebrated reformer Paolo Sarpi came onto the scene. As one would expect of a master of empire, the reform didn't address the rot within the system of empire itself, but was merely focused on countering the Renaissance ideals that had threatened the empire's very existence, as in the case of the League of Cambrai that was formed in the early 1500s to rid the world of the slave-trading abomination that Venice had become. In order to crush the Renaissance spirit, Sarpi had invented a doctrine that officially tolerated scientific and cultural development, though with a controlling hand on it to prevent its development by tying it into knots and turning it upside down. The resulting anti-Renaissance drive became this type of Enlightenment ideology that many embraced as a progressive idea, until they painfully recognized the deeply hidden built-in poison, the very poison that had started the new dark age of feudalism in Europe. Some people decided to escape the decaying landscape in Europe by seeking a new life for themselves on the distant shores of America. such as by the famous Mayflower voyage in 1620. And the colonists did create a new life for themselves. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the settlers created their own currency that served as credit for their economic development, such as for building the Saugus Iron Works that became one of the best in the world at the time. When the Venetian asset William of Orange invaded England and made himself king of the empire, much of what had been achieved in the Bay Colony was shut down and reversed. However, the idea of freedom from empire had been retained in America. It grew and became a revolution. The new nation, the United States of America, formed by the former colonial states, established itself on a revolutionary constitution that upheld the people's inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The masters in Europe must have seen this as a dangerous threat to the very existence of empire. They responded accordingly. They responded with another Sarpi-type poison dart. They responded with the Carrying Capacity Doctrine that was published in the wake of the enactment of the American Constitution. The Carrying Capacity Doctrine was published in 1790 by a Venetian monk named Tia Maria Ortiz. The doctrine renders humanity as a danger to the earth, as it expands populations seeking life, liberty, and happiness, which would demand more resources from the earth than the earth can deliver, thereby destroying the earth itself in the process. Ortiz's clever attack totally denies the fact that the very existence of humanity is built on created resources that don't exist naturally, such as agriculture. Ortiz's attack in the form of a denial became promoted by the masters of empire and continues to be so to the present day. It became the oligarchic doctrine. By the masters' power and influence, the doctrine became the world doctrine. It became promoted globally in the late 1960s via the United Nations Conference on Population, where the banner was raised up high that the earth has cancer and this cancer is man. Under the banner that the earth has cancer, the takedown of humanity was put into high gear. The first major attack was launched in 1971 with the takedown of the fixed exchange rates agreements of the Bretton Woods system that had enabled the post-war economic redevelopment of the world. The masters of empire saw the post-war economic development as a threat because it had created enormous cultural optimism and a new wave of prosperity around the world. The Apollo moon landing project was an example of the developing cultural, technological, and economic optimism. This train was wrecked with the Vietnam War, for which President Kennedy was killed, just to get the war started. While the war was still raging, the economic and financial stability of the world was further attacked by turning the world's currencies into gambling chips. Almost all the nations in the world suffered enormous losses when they had to devote their financial resources to defending their currencies against the hyenas that ran the currency gambling markets. Once the nations had their financial resources depleted that way. They were forced to go back into the hyenas to borrow the funds they needed to defend themselves with against them. This started the dramatic economic takedown of the world that is now resulting in social and economic chaos around the globe. In the USA, the post-war economic breakdown started with the enormous diversion of economic resources to conducting the Vietnam War. The instigating of war for the economic destruction of nations, especially the destruction of their human resources, has long been a cherished policy of empire and continues to be so. Ironically, the masters lamented that wars, even the big wars, are disappointing for them in that they don't kill enough people in the context of the Carrying Capacity Doctrine. This is what Bertrand Russell had pointed out in 1951 in an article for the Bulletin of the American Scientists. Even before the Vietnam War was fully stopped in 1974, a new threefold assault on humanity was launched to further increase the destruction of humanity. The American NSSM 200 policy was launched that targets the so-called Third World nations for the population to conserve their resources for the future needs of the empire. The second assault was the formulation of the post-industrial society doctrine that became powerfully pushed from the 1980s on, under the official program for the controlled disintegration of the world economy. And the third assault was launched with the global warming doctrine itself that was quickly deployed as a comprehensive supporting platform for all genocidal objectives. The genocidal thrust of the global warming doctrine was first directed towards shutting down the world's fossil fuel energy use that powers the modern global economy. In real terms, the primary thrust was directed against physical economic activity rather than fossil fuel energy. The point is evident in the relentless drive by the masters of empire to shut down nuclear energy development, simultaneously with their quest against fossil fuel energy use. Without energy use, the physical resources for modern living cannot be created, and a functional civilization cannot be maintained. From the background of the global warming genocidal objective, which is staging a deadly war against the global economy, still another form of genocide has been slowly implemented. This one has unleashed the most murderous Holocaust of all times by means of a system mandated under law that is devoted to massively burn food in an ever more starving world that struggles under the yoke of prevented economic development. The resulting Biofuels Holocaust that operates under the global warming doctrine has become enormous. It claims potentially 100 million victims a year. It dwarfs the horrific Nazi Holocaust into insignificance. The only efficient effect that the biofuels process is having in the world is relentless genocide and the destruction of the human spirit. That genocide is the objective behind the global warming doctrine became evident at the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Conference, where genocide was openly promoted. The British Optimum Population Trust submitted a report to the conference that stated that the cheapest way to deal with the global warming is to get rid of much of the population, eliminating 4,200 million people over the next 40 years. This genocidal ideology was cited as a solution to save the Earth under the global warming doctrine. That's the doctrine that the British Viscount Lord Christopher Monckton had declared to be a fraud, based on a vast body of leaked emails and other bodies of evidence. The Biofuels project evidently falls also into the same category, the category of fraud. The irony is that the use of biofuels does not reduce carbon emissions at all, nor does it create a new energy resource for humanity. It is well known that it takes a greater amount of energy input into the biofuels cycle than the fuel gives back. The often claimed net energy gain of 30% is regarded by many people who studied the issue as merely the result of hidden omissions in the accounting practice. The practice leaves out many secondary energy costs, such as for the production of the inputs and for the waste disposal afterwards. Biofuels are enormously expensive, destructive, and have a 35% lower energy yield. They are a step into the sewer. The bottom line is that the entire policy train of the masters of empire is focused on taking humanity down to its grave. Nothing has changed on this front from ancient times to our time. Nothing is even slowing the train. Evidently, the dreadful underlying objective of the masters of empire will likely succeed, especially in its most deadly aspects. The masters' most deadly thrust against humanity is directed at preventing humanity from preparing itself for the return of the Ice Age that is already on the not-so-distant horizon. When the Ice Age cooling begins, as it will, which may progress rapidly, and no preparations have been made to create new agriculture in protected areas, the ensuing Ice Age cooling will wipe out the bulk of the global food supply. When we get to this point, which is highly likely, considering that the global warming doctrine has near total support, then the empire will have succeeded in its depopulation objective, because then few people will be remaining alive. People simply cannot live without food.